We need to talk. Family meeting, 6:30 sharp. No excuses. That was the message from my mother. Short, cold, and final. I read it twice, maybe 3 times, hoping to find a trace of warmth between the lines. But there wasn't any. It wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. Like I was a junior employee being called into HR, not the daughter she had once cradled in her arms. I stood on the front porch of the house I'd grown up in, a stately colonial tucked away in Fairview, Vermont, my hand hovering above the polished brass doorbell, knowing that whatever waited on the other side would not be kind. The lawn was immaculate, the hedges manicured to perfection, the family crest still mounted above the entryway like some relic of outdated pride. A brand new BMW glinted in the driveway, Dad's pride and joy, as much as he ever allowed himself to show joy. The whole scene radiated success, the kind my family revered like gospel, and the kind I had apparently failed to achieve. You see, I'm Cassandra Campbell, the youngest, the black sheep, the disappointment. While my 2 brothers, Julian and Mark, collected Ivy League diplomas and stacked up job titles like trophies, I took a different route. One they never understood. One they never tried to. I didn't build a career around prestige or profit. I built it around my hands, crafting art from discarded things, turning what others threw away into something worth keeping. But to them, I might as well have been finger painting in a basement. Before I could ring the bell, the door swung open. My mother stood there, her shoulders drawn tight and her lips pressed into a line thin enough to slice. "You're late," she said. I checked my watch. 6:27. In this house, anything less than 10 minutes early was a sign of disrespect. Inside, the living room looked like a courtroom. Everyone already in place, everything already decided. Julian sat stiffly in his tailored suit, flipping through a manila folder. Mark wore his hospital scrubs like a medal of honor, the name tag still clipped as if to remind me of what I wasn't. My father stood by the fireplace, hands clasped behind his back like a judge preparing to deliver a sentence. And in the center of the room, a lone armchair faced them all, clearly reserved for me. "Sit, Cassandra," Dad said. Not a request. A command. I didn't sit. "What's this about?" I asked, though part of me already knew. Julian reached into his briefcase, pulled out a document, and laid it on the coffee table as if it were a contract to sever a business partnership. "We've discussed the future of the family," he said without emotion, "and come to a necessary decision." "For the good of the name," my mother added, her voice clipped but resolute. I picked up the papers, my heart pounding against my ribs. Legal language blurred across the page, but certain phrases jumped out like slaps. Formal severance of familial ties, relinquishment of inheritance, termination of association. "You're disowning me." The words scraped their way out of my throat, raw and disbelieving. "It's not personal," Mark said, finally looking up. "It's business." I laughed, a dry, bitter sound that echoed in the room full of people who used to tuck me into bed and kiss my scraped knees. "I'm your daughter. Your sister. How is this not personal?" My father stepped forward, calm as ever. "Your choices reflect poorly on this family. Your little craft project." "My business," I corrected. He ignored me. "Is not something we can continue to support, not when we've invested so much in your future." "You call that investment?" I snapped. "It felt more like control." "We gave you the best schools," my mother said. "Connections, resources, and you threw it all away to glue bottle caps to lamps." I stared at the document again. My hands didn't tremble. Maybe because I'd been preparing for this moment my whole life. Ever since the first time they called my passion a phase. Ever since they laughed when I told them I didn't want to work in an office tower. "Where do I sign?" My mother blinked, clearly caught off guard. They'd expected tears, begging, maybe some emotional monologue. But not this. "Cassandra, if you just..." "Where? Doctor, I... sign?" Julian pointed to the bottom of the page. Initial here, then sign. There's a notary in Dad's office. 10 minutes later, it was done. I was no longer a Campbell, not in any legal sense, but as I walked out of that room full of perfect people and cold silences, I felt something unexpected rising in my chest. Not grief, not anger, not even regret. It was freedom, and they had no idea what they'd just unleashed. I walked out of the Campbell house with no dramatic slamming of the door, no raised voice, no final look back to give them the closure they didn't deserve. The night air greeted me with a quiet chill, the kind that settles deep in your chest when you realize the home you were raised in was never truly yours. I had just been disowned, legally, formally, with signatures and witnesses. Not with tears or rage, but with documents, cold and binding, like a termination letter from a job I never applied for. As I made my way down the walkway bordered by boxwood hedges and judgment, I could still hear the echo of my father's voice in my ears. This is for the best. Maybe it was, because in that moment, as I reached my car, I felt something unexpected. Not despair, not anger, not even sorrow. What I felt was relief, the weight of years, of unspoken expectations, passive-aggressive remarks, subtle eye rolls at holiday dinners, and quiet comparisons to my more successful siblings. It all lifted, not suddenly, but like a heavy coat being shrugged off after a long winter. The engine of my old pickup rumbled to life, not glamorous, not silent like my brother's electric sedan, but honest and familiar with every scratch on the dashboard and speck of dried paint on the steering wheel telling the story of who I really was. I pulled away from the driveway of my childhood, not looking in the rearview mirror, because what was behind me no longer defined me. When I arrived back at my workshop, my sanctuary tucked inside a converted barn on the edge of Middleton, the familiar scent of sawdust and varnish met me like an embrace. The walls lined with tools, sketches, and half-finished pieces didn't judge or ask why I hadn't become someone else. They simply waited for me to pick up where I left off. I turned on the overhead lights, casting a warm glow over the shelves of glass shards, reclaimed wood, and metal scraps I'd gathered over the years. Where others saw trash, I saw stories waiting to be told. I checked my phone, expecting maybe a message from a friend or a client, but instead found a string of notifications from my business account. My heart skipped. An order had come through, then another, then 6. I blinked. My online shop had been picking up steam for months, but this was different. I logged into my dashboard, and my jaw nearly dropped. A lifestyle blog had just posted a feature on my work, completely unexpected, and it was spreading fast. Within the hour, I had over 100 new orders, inquiries from boutiques in Portland, Asheville, and Santa Fe, and a message from a major retailer asking for a custom proposal. I stared at the screen, barely breathing. My hands, which had just signed away my birthright, now held something far more powerful, proof. Proof that I had built something real, something meaningful, and entirely mine. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same evening my family cut me off, the world outside their curated bubble was welcoming me in. The next morning I barely had time to process the flood of interest before Ezra, my business partner and marketing wizard, burst into the studio, his tablet in one hand and a bag of breakfast pastries in the other. "Cass," he said breathless, "you are not going to believe this." He spun the screen toward me and there it was. A full-page article from Craft & Home Journal featuring my latest collection. Cassandra Monroe, the artisan redefining sustainable beauty. The phone started buzzing again. This time it was Style Point magazine, then Homefront Weekly. Ezra grinned like a madman. "This is it. This is your moment. You're about to go national." I wanted to laugh or cry or both, but instead I just sat on the workbench, hands folded in my lap, trying to make sense of the timing. Just 24 hours earlier, I had been told, to my face, that I was an embarrassment, a burden to the family name, a disappointment with a glue gun. Now I was being asked to speak on panels, to collaborate with design houses, to share my story. I didn't gloat. I didn't screenshot the articles and send them to my family, though part of me wanted to. Instead, I did what I've always done. I got back to work. I began packaging orders, replying to messages, carefully wrapping delicate wind chimes made from beach glass and salvaged copper, knowing they would soon hang in homes across the country. Each piece I touched felt like a reclamation of identity. Not revenge, not yet, but restoration. 3 days later, as I was sanding down a slab of maple that would become the centerpiece for a commissioned dining table, my best friend Mara showed up with 2 iced coffees and a stare that could pierce steel. "Is it true?" she asked, not bothering with hello. I nodded, handing her the non-disclosure form I had to sign for the upcoming feature with Interior Edge. She skimmed the headline and let out a whistle. "They disowned you, and 3 days later you're the talk of the artisan world?" "They expected me to fall apart," I said quietly, wiping down the table. But all I did was finally have the space to build. That night I stayed late in the studio watching the orders come in like waves. I didn't feel sadness for what I'd lost, because the truth was I hadn't lost anything worth keeping. What I felt was something deeper. The kind of calm that only comes when the noise of judgment finally fades. My family had always believed that love was conditional, tied to status, to obedience, to legacy. But here, surrounded by scraps and sketches and sawdust, I was finally free to define myself without apology. And that freedom, that quiet power, was just the beginning. The following weeks blurred into one long golden stretch of creation and quiet victory. I barely noticed the days turning into nights, the seasons beginning to shift, or the aching in my shoulders from endless hours bent over work tables that had become extensions of my own body. Something had awakened inside me, a drive I didn't know I possessed, or perhaps one I'd been forced to keep hidden under years of dismissal and disdain. The studio, once a dusty old barn, now pulsed with the energy of something being born. Orders came faster than I could process. At first, I tried to keep up alone, stubbornly thinking I didn't need help, but when Ezra finally intervened, his usual whirlwind of charm and spreadsheets, I knew it was time. We brought on 2 assistants, then 4. Every shelf groaned under the weight of pending shipments, and yet the demand kept rising. My inbox overflowed with messages from boutiques, design houses, and influencers I'd never even heard of, each one asking the same question. "Can you send samples? How soon can we feature your work?" Mara, who had always been my best friend and now acted as my second pair of hands, and sometimes my sanity, stood back one evening as I hung a new collection of wind chimes made from fractured sea glass and vintage copper wire. She didn't say anything at first, just stared quietly at the way the glass caught the afternoon light. Then, as I stepped down from the ladder, she exhaled slowly and said, "You know they're going to see this eventually. Your family. It's everywhere now." I shrugged, more out of habit than indifference. They made their choice. But even as I said it, I knew, deep down, that visibility would change everything. And it did. It started with a call from Style and Timber, a regional magazine known for spotlighting artisanal creators. They wanted to do a feature, a full spread with photos, an interview, and even a behind-the-scenes look at my process. I said yes, assuming it would be a one-off. But the article exploded across social media, shared by eco-conscious communities, interior design enthusiasts, and sustainability advocates. It wasn't just the art people were drawn to. It was the story behind it. They called me the woman who turned exile into empire. Suddenly, I wasn't just another craftswoman. I was a symbol of transformation, of quiet revenge, of reclaiming your narrative without screaming it from the rooftops. One morning, as I was adjusting a lighting fixture made from salvaged piano wire, Ezra rushed in like a storm barely contained in human form. He didn't even knock, just barreled through the studio doors with a wild look in his eyes and his laptop clutched like it held the secrets of the universe. "You need to see this," he said, setting the device in front of me. There, glowing on the screen, was the homepage of Living North America. My face, framed by a halo of warm light, backdropped by one of my larger installations, smiled back at me under a bold headline: Cassandra Munro, redefining elegance with the things we throw away. "Page views are spiking," Ezra said, his voice almost shaking with excitement. "Retailers are calling, media is reaching out, and Cassandra," he paused, eyes wide. "Style House wants to talk licensing." I sat back slowly, trying to process the magnitude of it all. This wasn't just local buzz anymore. This was national. This was every designer's dream, except I hadn't followed their rules. I hadn't waited for approval or begged for acceptance. I had simply kept creating, kept building, kept believing in something no one else had taken the time to see. Within days, we were fielding requests from media outlets I'd only ever read about in waiting rooms. Home and Garden Weekly, The Modern Artisan, even a nod from Business Forward, which had started a special spotlight series on sustainable entrepreneurs. Then came the moment that shifted everything. A woman named Catherine Chen called from Business Forward. Her voice was polished, direct, but kind. She told me they'd been tracking the rise of independent creators who were making waves in the sustainability sector, and my name kept coming up. "We'd like to feature you," she said. "There's talk of a potential cover, but at minimum, a lead profile." I remember going silent on the line for a second too long. She asked if I was still there. "Yes," I finally said, and though my voice sounded calm, my heart thundered like I'd just run a marathon. I'd be honoured. That night, I didn't sleep. Not out of anxiety, but because my mind refused to quiet. I stood in my workshop long after the others had left, the scent of varnish and citrus oil lingering in the air, and stared at the piece I'd been working on all week. A chandelier made from broken mirrors and bent silverware. It wasn't just art, it was proof. Proof that something shattered could still reflect light. That next morning, the photo shoot began. Reporters arrived with cameras and voice recorders. Mara made coffee while Ezra coordinated interviews. The studio, my once humble sanctuary, now echoed with flashes, laughter, and questions about vision, process, and purpose. But the moment that stopped me cold was when the photographer asked me to stand beside the Phoenix sculpture, one of my earliest works, made entirely from recycled copper roofing and river glass. "Tell me about this one," he asked, angling the lens. I ran my fingers along the edges of the wings, thinking of how I'd welded it late one night after yet another family gathering ended in disappointment. "It's called resilience," I said softly. "It's about what rises when everything else burns." And maybe I imagined it, but I thought I saw the photographer's eyes soften. By the time the Business Forward feature went live, our website had crashed twice from traffic. We had waitlists for nearly every collection. Design firms offered partnership deals. A major department store, one of those legacy brands that once wouldn't have returned my email, wanted exclusive access to a new line. But what none of them knew was that just minutes after the article published, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I hadn't seen since that night. "Wendy, we need to talk. Urgent family matter." Then came another from Mark, then Julian. And finally, my mother. Family dinner. Sunday, 7 p.m. "We have much to discuss." I stared at the messages, not with anger, but with a strange kind of sadness. The kind that comes when you realize people never saw your worth until others did first. Mara stood beside me, reading over my shoulder. "Are you going?" she asked, a note of hesitation in her voice. I didn't answer right away, because I wasn't sure if it was time, or if I was ready. But one thing was certain. They had seen the light. They just never expected it to shine without them. Sunday came faster than I had expected. The days leading up to it had been packed with interviews, product launches, and meetings with retailers who now treated my signature like gold. I had barely processed the business forward cover when my assistant handed me a call sheet that included inquiries from Good Morning America, The Today Show, and a documentary team filming a series on American women entrepreneurs reshaping legacy industries. I should have been elated, and in many ways, I was. But the looming shadow of Sunday's dinner clung to the corners of my mind like smoke that wouldn't clear. Every time I looked at the clock, I saw that message again. Family dinner, Sunday, 7 p.m. We have much to discuss. No apology. No warmth. Just another directive. By the time I pulled into the driveway of my parents' home in Fairview, dusk was falling, casting long shadows across the manicured hedges and pristine walkway that hadn't changed in decades. It felt like stepping back in time, except this time, I wasn't walking in empty-handed. In my passenger seat sat a copy of the Business Forward magazine, the one with my face on the cover, under the headline, "The Artisan Who Rewrote the Rules," and next to it, a folder of signed contracts, media features, and revenue projections that would have made any Fortune 500 executive sit up straighter. Not because I needed to prove anything, but because I wanted the truth to be present in that room, even if they still couldn't speak it aloud. The door opened before I could knock. My mother stood there, looking nearly identical to the woman who had handed me a pen and a disownment agreement months before. Same pearls, same tailored blouse. But there was something new behind her eyes now. Desperation, maybe? Or fear? Or perhaps recognition? "Cassandra, darling," she said, stepping forward for a hug she hadn't offered in years. I didn't return it. "We've missed you." Behind her, the living room was filled with familiar faces. Julian sitting stiffly again with his briefcase by his side. Mark pretending to scroll his phone, but clearly watching me from the corner of his eye. My father by the fireplace, just like before, except this time his posture lacked the rigid confidence he once cloaked himself in. And there, on the coffee table, was the magazine. My face stared up at us from the glossy cover, a silent witness to what they'd tried to erase. "We should talk," my father said, motioning to the same chair they had forced me into last time. The chair of the accused. This time I sat willingly, smoothing the skirt of my designer dress as I did so, a quiet reminder that what they had called a hobby now paid for every stitch of what I wore. Wendy, always the family's legal mouthpiece, cleared her throat and tapped the magazine cover. "Your work is impressive," she said, her voice carefully composed. "The margins noted in the article are remarkable." "Remarkable," I echoed, raising an eyebrow. "Last I heard, it was just glue and glitter, wasn't it, Mark?" He shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. "We may have been hasty in our judgment," my mother offered, her tone hopeful but tentative. "Hasty?" I repeated with a hollow laugh. "You had it notarized." "We've been talking," my father interrupted, "and we believe it's time to rectify that unfortunate situation." "Unfortunate," I said slowly, letting the words settle between us like smoke. "That's what we're calling it now?" Wendy reached for her briefcase, producing a new set of documents. These papers would nullify the disownment agreement. You'd be reinstated legally, as family. The timing couldn't have been more transparent. Right after the magazine cover, the national interviews, the MoMA exhibition announcement, I said, my voice even. "Convenient." Julian perked up. "MoMA?" I smiled lightly. "Yes, they're flying me to New York next week. Private jet. They're calling the installation Legacy Reclaimed." My mother's teacup slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor. No one moved to pick it up. "Cassandra," my father said, stepping forward, his voice now low and measured, the tone he reserved for boardrooms and bankers. "There's something else we need to discuss. The dealership is struggling." "I know," I said before he could continue. I did my research. Electric vehicle trends, collapsing loan terms, the loss of legacy clients. You're not just underwater, you're sinking. He looked stunned. How? I have advisors now, the kind who keep me informed of opportunity. He tried to recover. Then you understand. We need to evolve. Your sustainability model, your media presence, it's exactly what the business needs. We thought, perhaps there could be synergy. I let the silence hang, heavy and deliberate. So let me get this straight, I said finally. You don't want me back. You want what I've built to save you. That's not fair, Mark said, rising. We're family. Are we? I turned and walked to the fireplace where a row of family photos still sat, graduation shots, holiday portraits, career achievements. Not one included me. Because 3 months ago, in this exact room, you made it very clear that I wasn't family anymore. My mother's voice was barely above a whisper. We made a mistake. No, I said, turning to face them. You made a decision, and now you're facing the cost of it. Wendy tried again, sliding the papers closer. We can fix this. I looked down at the documents, then back at the people who had once stood united in cutting me out. You can't fix something you refuse to admit was broken. Just then my phone buzzed. It was a message from Ezra. Singapore Collector doubled their offer again, says price is no object. I slid my phone back into my purse. I have a meeting, I said, gathering my things, with people who believed in me before the headlines. My mother reached for my hand. Please, she whispered, we were wrong. What more can we say? I gently pulled away. You know what's fascinating about my work? I said softly. I take things people throw away, broken, discarded, forgotten things, and I turn them into something valuable. But not everything can be salvaged. Some relationships once shattered stay that way. Julian stepped forward, desperate now. So that's it. You're going to hold a grudge forever? I looked at him, calm and clear. I'm not holding a grudge. I'm holding a standard. At the door, I turned back once more. You taught me something valuable when you let me go. Sometimes the family you choose is worth more than the one you're born into. Then I left them, sitting among their cold tea, shattered porcelain, and the echoes of choices they could never undo. Outside, the air was sharp and clean. My driver was waiting. I stepped into the car, one hand resting on the magazine in my lap. And as we pulled away from the house that had once been my cage, I didn't look back, not out of anger, but because what lay ahead was finally, unmistakably, mine. After that night, something inside me shifted, not in a sudden explosive way, but like a slow realignment of bones after years of carrying weight that was never mine to bear. I didn't cry after leaving the house in Fairview. I didn't rage or spiral into what-ifs or why-nots. Instead, I went home to my studio, turned on the lights, and kept working. Not because I was trying to prove something anymore, but because creating was no longer a rebellion against their dismissal. It had become the very proof of who I was, who I had always been beneath the silence they forced on me. In the days that followed, the world moved quickly, as if trying to keep pace with the years I had been denied recognition. Our orders tripled. Retailers circled back, some of them for the third time, this time willing to accept my terms without negotiation. Ezra negotiated a licensing deal with Greenhouse Interiors that included a national commercial and dedicated shelf space in over 100 stores. Mara expanded our fulfillment team and personally interviewed every candidate to make sure they understood the story behind each piece we made. We weren't just selling home decor. We were offering a narrative, one made from reclaimed materials and reclaimed dignity. Then, the phone call came. A woman from the Museum of Modern Craft in New York, calm, confident, and clearly briefed, said my name had been shortlisted for a featured installation in their upcoming exhibit on sustainable innovation. We'd like to meet with you next week, she said. We're prepared to send a car to bring you to the city, and we'd cover all travel arrangements. Your work speaks to something deeper than trend. I don't remember what I said in response, only how still the room became after I hung up. How even Mara, who never ran out of words, stood in stunned silence as the magnitude of that moment settled over us like a quiet storm. That night, as I sat at my work table shaping the final details of a sculpture built from salvaged brass and fractured mirror glass, I received another message, this time from Wendy. Dad's meeting with bankruptcy attorneys tomorrow. Please call, they're losing the house. I set the phone aside without replying. Not out of cruelty, but because I knew if I responded too quickly, I'd still be doing it from a place of guilt. And guilt had been their currency for too long. The next morning, Mara knocked softly on the door to my loft. She didn't say anything at first, just walked in and held out a padded envelope with a quiet, unreadable look in her eyes. "It came by courier," she said, "from your father." Inside was a thick sheet of stationery, embossed at the top with his name, the kind he used for business correspondence, not personal sentiment. And below, a handwritten letter that looked like it had been started and restarted more times than he'd ever admit. "Cass, I've written this letter in my head 100 times, and none of it ever comes out right. I've failed you. Not just in the decisions we made, but in all the years before that, in all the times I didn't see you for who you were. I thought I was protecting our name, our legacy, but I forgot. The only legacy worth anything is the kind that leaves people better than it found them. And I didn't leave you better. I left you alone. I'm not writing to ask for money. I'm writing to ask for a chance to be your father finally, the way I should have been. Not for the business, not for appearances, just for you. I'm proud of you, not because you've succeeded, but because you never stopped being you even when we made it unbearable. Love, Dad." The paper shook in my hands as I read it again, then a third time unsure whether the words were healing or hollow or both. I had waited my entire life for that sentence. I'm proud of you. And now that it was here, I didn't know what to do with it. Ezra walked in just then, holding a mock-up of our next campaign, but stopped when he saw the letter in my hands. "He said it?" he asked gently. I nodded, still staring at the closing line. "For the first time in my life," I whispered, "and not because of what I earned, because of who I am." He sat beside me in silence, as if knowing no business metric or milestone could rival that single sentence. Then, as if the universe couldn't resist testing my resolve, another text came in, this time from Louisa. "Mum's in the hospital. Exhaustion. She's asking for you." I felt something twist in my chest. Not pain exactly, but a deep, aching ache that came from a lifetime of needing something that had never been given freely. I read the message twice, then 3 times. Not because I was unsure of what it said, but because I needed to decide who I wanted to be in this moment. The daughter they had discarded, or the woman I had become. "Call the car," I said quietly. Mara didn't ask where we were going. She just nodded, already dialing. That afternoon, I sat in the back of the town car as it pulled out of the driveway of my studio. A space that had once felt like exile, but now felt like home. On my lap sat the sculpture I had finished that morning, a phoenix made from twisted steel and reclaimed glass, its wings arched not in fury, but in flight. When we arrived at the hospital, I didn't go straight to her room. Instead, I asked the nurse for the conference room and texted my siblings to meet me there. If we were going to rebuild something from this wreckage, it would be with full clarity and no illusions. As they walked in one by one, Wendy with her legal pad, Mark with a nervous twitch in his jaw, and Louisa holding her purse like a shield, I stood by the table, the phoenix sculpture at its centre, its shadows cast long and fragmented by the fluorescent light above. "We'll go see Mum in a moment," I said. "But first, there are things we need to say out loud." They looked at one another, unsure of what I meant. I'm not here to lecture or punish, I continued, but I won't pretend we can just move forward without acknowledging what came before. I turned to Wendy. You drafted the papers that cut me out. To Louisa. You mocked my work, my choices, and made sure I heard it every time. And to Mark. You couldn't even look at me that night. The room fell quiet, the hum of hospital machinery filling the silence. I don't want your apologies, I said. I want your honesty. And slowly, painfully, awkwardly, it came. Wendy was the first to break. I was wrong, she whispered. I was chasing someone else's definition of success, and I was scared. You had the courage I didn't. Louisa followed, wiping a tear with the back of her hand. I resented how free you were. I stayed in a box because I thought I had to. You built something beautiful while I buried myself in expectations. Mark looked down, then up again. I stayed quiet, he said, because I thought silence meant safety, but it just meant complicity. I nodded. The truth, even when it arrived late, was better than the silence that had nearly broken us. Then the door opened, and my father stepped in. He looked smaller somehow, not just physically, but in the way men look when they've finally dropped the armor they've worn their entire lives. I heard everything, he said, walking to the phoenix and resting his hand gently on one wing. And I have nothing to add except you deserved better from me, from all of us. I didn't respond. Not yet. Because the woman who used to crave their acceptance had been replaced by someone far stronger. Someone who had already learned the most valuable lesson of all. You only need to be chosen by others when you haven't yet chosen yourself. And for the first time, I had. By the time we reached my mother's hospital room, the sky outside had darkened into a soft navy, and the hallway lights buzzed with a low, humming quiet that felt oddly appropriate for what was about to unfold. Room 304 looked no different from any other hospital suite. Clean, clinical, bathed in the pale blue glow of machines that whispered and blinked steadily. But the woman in the bed was not the one who had once stood behind ivory china and heirloom candlesticks with a voice as sharp as her judgments. She looked smaller now, more human, her hand frail against the blanket, her eyes searching mine with something I hadn't seen in years, humility. Cass, she said softly, her voice barely more than breath, my baby. And in that moment, I saw not the matriarch who had cast me out, but the tired mother of 3 children who had made too many decisions from fear and too few from love. She reached for my hand with a tremble I hadn't expected, and I let her take it. Not because I had forgotten, but because I had grown. Forgiveness, I was learning, doesn't always come with fireworks or absolution. Sometimes it arrives as stillness, a quiet decision to stop carrying what was never ours to begin with. We can't take it back, she whispered through tears. But can we try again? Please. I didn't answer with words. I simply held her hand a little tighter, because rebuilding wasn't about pretending the pain hadn't happened. It was about choosing to build anyway. Later that evening, as the rest of the family trickled in and we gathered in the conference room once more, not as combatants this time, but as people finally stripped of ego, I set down the phoenix sculpture at the center of the table. It gleamed under the fluorescent light, its wings arched in motion, its surface catching fragments of reflection from every angle. It had been forged from the ashes of things most people would discard: bent copper piping, shattered glass, the remnants of a barn fire no one had bothered to clear. But now it was a centerpiece, beautiful and defiant, exactly like the life I had rebuilt. Before anything else, I said, addressing them all, there's one condition. If we move forward, we do so on new terms. Mine. They nodded slowly, cautiously. The old dealership structure is finished, I continued, sliding a stack of papers across the table. Phoenix Electric replaces it. A new company built on sustainability, innovation, and transparency. I'll invest the capital to restructure, cover the debts, and rebrand the entire operation. But I'm CEO, non-negotiable. Dad becomes chairman emeritus, in an advisory role only. Shares are distributed based on contribution to the new vision, not bloodline. Julian blinked. Louisa opened her mouth, then closed it. Mark didn't speak at all, but the muscle in his jaw tightened. And one more thing, I added, pulling a single sheet from my folder. The disownment agreement. I want it destroyed, publicly, at the first board meeting of Phoenix Electric. Wendy nodded first, standing slowly. I agree, she said, her voice quieter than usual, and I'm ready to help you build it, the right way this time. Louisa stood next. Me too. I've already started mapping a medical transport division for the new brand. EV conversions for patient shuttles, low-emission fleet design. I want to bring my knowledge into this, not just my guilt. Even Mark, who had said the least of all, met my gaze and said simply, "Tell me where you need me." I looked at my father, the man who had once cast the deciding vote to erase me. He didn't say anything at first, just walked to the head of the table, placed his hand on the Phoenix's wing, and nodded. "This is yours now," he said. "You've already done what I never could, turned something broken into something the world wants to believe in again." 2 weeks later, Phoenix Electric launched with a press event unlike anything our town had ever seen. Journalists flew in from both coasts. A chandelier made from reclaimed engine parts spun slowly above the showroom entrance, casting dappled light across displays of the first EV models we'd rebranded. Elegant, efficient, and designed with art in every inch. Ezra stood off to the side, managing live coverage streams, while Mara moved among the guests like the quiet engine of a dream finally realized. My siblings each found their corners. Louisa at the design booth for mobile clinics, Julian guiding investors through the new finance model, Mark leading a tour of the R&D lab focused on battery sustainability. As for my mother, she didn't speak much that day, but she stayed close, her hand brushing mine now and then as if still unsure I would disappear again. And when the governor himself asked about commissioning a custom piece for the State House atrium, she whispered, "Tell him to speak to your assistant. You're very exclusive now, you know." I smiled. Not because I needed her validation, but because it no longer had the power to make or break me. The press asked about the name. "Why Phoenix?" one reporter shouted over the buzz. I looked at the sculpture standing behind me, the one that had once been a pile of scrap, now commanding attention in a glass case bathed in light. Because when you burn it all down, the judgment, the fear, the rejection, you discover what was always waiting in the ashes. Something new, something stronger. And I meant it. That night, after the showroom had emptied, we gathered beneath the chandelier, the shadows of its metal feathers dancing over our tired faces. My father cleared his throat and held up a folded paper. "The disownment letter," he said. "We never did destroy it." "I have another idea," I said, retrieving a shallow glass dish from my work table. We each tore off a piece of the letter and dropped it in, not to forget, but to transform. Then, together, we melted the pieces down, mixed them into molten glass, and shaped them into something new. A small sculpture of a family, imperfect but whole, the ashes visible in every vein of colour. "It's us," my mother whispered. "It's who we choose to be," I corrected gently. "Now." And with that the phoenix rose, not just from the fire, but from every scar, every silence, and every choice to love again, but differently. The grand opening of the Phoenix Electric flagship showroom was unlike anything I could have imagined when I first started sanding driftwood in the corner of an old barn. Beneath a canopy of soft lighting and polished concrete floors stood rows of elegantly designed electric vehicles. Not just machines, but statements of reinvention, purpose, and future thinking. Above them hung my latest installation, a chandelier of sculpted light made from reclaimed engine parts, antique glass, and melted metal once part of the very dealership that had been on the brink of collapse. Reporters gathered in tight clusters, notepads out, cameras flashing, and industry insiders murmured in admiration as they walked through the space, noting the seamless blend of innovation and artistry. My name was on every plaque, every press release, and, more importantly, every whispered conversation about how one woman had taken the ruins of a broken inheritance and turned them into a new kind of legacy. Ezra rushed to my side, tablet in hand, his eyes wide behind thick frames. "We've got 3 major national retailers begging for exclusivity," he said, nearly breathless, "and the media requests won't stop. You're trending in 5 categories: art, sustainability, innovation, family enterprise, and, get this, emotional comeback." I smiled, not with arrogance, but with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had once been told she had nothing to offer. Across the room, Mara waved me over with a soft grin, nodding toward a woman in a navy suit. "The governor's representative. She wants to commission a public sculpture for the State House garden." "I'll have my assistant coordinate," I said, straightening the hem of my tailored suit. "The same one I'd bought with my glue and glitter money," as my brother once mocked. My mother drifted toward me, her movements tentative but more confident than before. Her hand brushed mine, a habit she'd picked up in recent weeks, as if checking that I was real, or perhaps reminding herself that she hadn't lost me after all. "The crowd is incredible," she said softly. "You've made something so beautiful, inside and out." I turned to look at her fully, noting how much she had aged and softened, not just in her posture but in her voice. "We made it," I corrected gently, once we stopped breaking things and started fixing them. Nearby, Wendy raised her glass in a toast. "To fixing things," she called, her eyes scanning our family, now reconfigured around shared respect instead of forced expectation. "And to my sister, who taught us that sometimes the most valuable things are the ones we almost throw away." The night unfolded with laughter and light, stories told between champagne flutes, and sketches scrawled on cocktail napkins as future plans took root. Somewhere between the media interviews and quiet glances of pride from my father, I realized that this was no longer about revenge or redemption. This was about legacy. Not the one I had inherited, but the one I had chosen to create. Later, when the last of the guests had gone and the showroom had emptied, our family gathered beneath the chandelier one final time. Its light played across our faces, bouncing off old scars and new beginnings alike. My father held up the envelope that once contained the disownment agreement. "We never destroyed this publicly," he said. "I had something else in mind," I replied, stepping away and returning moments later with a glass bowl already warming in the studio kiln. We tore the document piece by piece and dropped it into the flames, not to erase what had happened, but to fold it into the story of who we had become. Hours later, the sculpture was complete. A small family of abstract figures fused together by swirls of ash and molten glass. It wasn't perfect, and that's exactly why it was beautiful. "This is us," my mother whispered, running a finger over the still cooling surface. "It's who we are now," I said, not needing to add more. In the weeks that followed, Phoenix Electric continued to grow, not as a dealership reborn, but as a movement, a model of what a modern family business could be when rooted in truth, innovation, and hard-earned trust. The media dubbed us the Resurrection brand, and the community rallied behind our youth apprenticeship programs, our sustainable transport initiatives, and the local art centre that broke ground on the very lot where I had once been disowned. And somewhere along the way, we stopped tiptoeing around the past. We began saying thank you without resentment, I'm sorry without pride, and I'm proud of you without conditions. We became a new kind of family, one that knew exactly which pieces to keep, which to transform, and which to let go. As I stood in my studio late one evening, watching the last light of day fracture through a stained glass panel made from broken windshield glass, I realized that I no longer felt the need to be seen. I was seen, fully, finally, by the people who once refused to look. And more importantly, I had learned to see myself. Sometimes the people who break you also teach you what you're made of. And sometimes what you're made of is stronger than anything they ever imagined. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been cast aside, doubted, or underestimated, remember, your worth isn't defined by those who walked away. It's revealed by how you rise. Subscribe for more stories of quiet revenge, emotional triumph, and second chances. Because here, underdogs don't just survive, they build empires.